I'd like to welcome in now Dan Perry, former Europe, Africa, and Middle East editor for the Associated Press. So, Dan, as Libby just laid out there, we know the president will be attending this critical summit in Egypt. Lay out some of what will potentially happen there.
Well, the summit was originally envisioned as more or less a PR victory lap for President Trump, because Netanyahu was not going to be there, nor was it even clear that the Palestinian Authority would be there, and essentially it looked to be largely for show. But it's very different if indeed Netanyahu ends up attending. Remember, the context is that, for example, the Egyptian president, Sisi, a massive player in the region, hasn't spoken to Netanyahu for years and has been resisting a meeting, I believe, throughout his entire tenure. And the Arab world in general is in a state of some agitation over the damage Israel caused in Gaza during the war. I think this reflects a sense by the Americans that there is an opportunity here to leverage something local into something regional. The war in Gaza was a massive event, but it was an event about Gaza and Israel. Whereas if Netanyahu really ends up meeting 20 Muslim leaders under the aegis of President Trump and his entire high-level coterie in Egypt, that starts to look like the beginning of a true regional realignment of a kind that was actually envisioned long ago, even under President Biden, that from this disaster, out of darkness can come light, and maybe the shock to the system that all sides, Israelis and Arabs, absorbed on October 7th and the Gaza cataclysm that followed, might lead everyone to reassess. And that might involve the Arab world giving up on this craven tolerance of jihadism and of militias all over the region, and of playing all sides and of tolerating militant Islamism. And on the Israeli side, of course, they would need to find some way to put aside the political problems in the Israeli right and enter some sort of dialogue about some sort of Palestinian sovereignty in the West Bank and Gaza.
And as you were speaking there, Dan, so NewsNation has confirmed that, yes, Netanyahu was invited to Egypt. As of our last check, a White House official telling NewsNation they are not yet sure if Netanyahu will go. They are trying to work out the logistics. My question for you, we know that these remarks by the president to the parliament were set to start almost an hour and a half ago. Obviously, there's a lot unfolding. There are so many moving parts. But what is likely happening behind the scenes right now? I mean, are negotiations likely ongoing still right now?
Look, I have a difficult time envisioning Trump getting down to brass tacks and details and the nuances of which police force will occupy which neighborhood in Gaza. That's and what is it will be the composition. That can't be it. I have to assess that this delay in the schedule and these unexpected prolonged talks with Netanyahu do relate to the big shift today, which is that Netanyahu is being invited, apparently, to Egypt to meet every Arab and Muslim leader practically, including Turkey, including Indonesia, that's been discussed as a possible addition to the Abraham Accords, even though they're on the other side of the planet. They're a Muslim country that's not been friendly to Israel. This could be huge. And it really is remarkable if Trump pulls this off. I have to say, he it is a raw display of American power, and of what happens when you have a determined American president who actually has leverage. It stands in contrast to Trump's rebuffed efforts to end the war in Ukraine, which seemed to have been his main priority when he first took office. I have to think, because he simply doesn't have enough leverage on Russia, or at least not of the kind that the U.S. is willing to use, because Russia has its own a deterrent power, and it's simply too big. But in the case of the Middle East, he has total leverage on Israel. Israel cannot continue the war without the U.S., and he has sufficient leverage on the Arabs, and in particular on Qatar and Turkey. Turkey wants back into defense cooperation. They want F-35s. They want to consolidate their gains in Syria and have that be recognized. They want to make nice. And Qatar obviously hosts the largest U.S. airbase in the region and has been playing all sides, but also wants to be seen as a Western ally. Hamas, the support for Hamas simply doesn't give them enough. So Trump was able to leverage Turkey and Qatar, and of course Egypt as well, to put sufficient pressure on Hamas to apparently agree. But I have to caution that something interesting is happening here. Hamas has not yet agreed to the key bit that got Netanyahu to agree without being, truly railroaded by Trump, which is the key point in the 20-point plan, which is that they disarm, at least in Gaza. They haven't agreed to this. They dangled the hostages before Israel this first phase, but the rest is extremely fuzzy. Now, Trump has said the war is over. I have to think that means he has the promise of the Arabs that Qatar really will honor the deal. But if it turns out that Hamas will, if it turns out Hamas does not disarm, then we have a real fork in the road. We either have a return to the war, which looks inconceivable today among the celebrations, or Trump has to eat some humble pie, and it will emerge that basically he forced Israel to accept the same deals on the table for 2 years now almost, which is the return of the hostages in exchange for an end to the war, but Hamas stays. So this issue of whether or not Hamas stays is highly pivotal, and again, it makes a lot of sense that this is what will be discussed in the presence of Netanyahu in Sharm el-Sheikh. How to make sure that even though there's no public agreement yet by Hamas to actually really accept a 20-point plan that includes the disarmament, that this is forced down their throats no matter what. That is truly desperately critical.
And really quickly, Dan, we are running out of time, but you mentioned some of the fuzziness related to this. Hamas will not have representatives at this peace summit. Does that concern you at all?
No, that reflects something very good. The past 2 years have been a disaster, and obviously loss of life enormous and tragic and heartbreaking. But on a geostrategic side, some good things happened. The weakening of Hezbollah and of Iran, and in particular, the recognition of the Arab world that these militias, most of which are in the thrall of Iran and funded by Iran and guided by Iran and armed and trained by Iran, are illegitimate. And that includes, first and foremost, Hezbollah and Hamas. And if Hamas isn't there, that underscores that this is not some kind of peace deal with Hamas, but this is an arrangement over the head of Hamas imposed by the Arab world, which I remind you 3 months ago called on Hamas to disarm in what was the crossing of a major Rubicon, that they're prepared to put their money and their force where their mouth is and to actually make this happen. That would have been very much rendered moot and ridiculous if they had then invited Hamas to this event. So Hamas's non-invitation reflects that the Arab world has really moved on from everything represented by jihadism and Hamas. At least that's the message for sure. And that is the hope, I think, of every person who cares about peace in a region and the world.
Dan Perry, thank you so much for your insight. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.